Out of nowhere, a police K-9 bolts forward, barking furiously at a black woman who stands in the middle of the street. The officer, his face stern and commanding, shouts at her to get down, but her eyes widen in confusion and fear. The dog's growls grow louder, as if it's been trained to attack without hesitation. The woman stands there, frozen, unsure of what's happening or why this is happening to her. She tries to take in the scene. The barking dog, the shouting officer, the people around watching, her heart pounding in her chest. This isn't the kind of moment anyone expects to experience. Should she comply with the officer's orders? Should she try to defend herself? The air is thick with tension, and the dog gets closer, its teeth now visible, ready to strike. Just as the dog lunges toward her, the officer suddenly stops in his tracks. He blinks in shock, his face going pale, eyes widening in disbelief. The woman doesn't even flinch. She stands tall, unwavering. The officer looks closely at her again, as if trying to comprehend what had just happened. What he doesn't realize is that this woman is someone far beyond what he could have ever expected. As the officer stands in silence, it's clear that his world is about to turn upside down. This black woman is no ordinary person. Her identity holds a power that will change everything. How will he react when he discovers who she really is? Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. The officer stands frozen in shock as the woman calmly looks back at him. For a moment, everything seems to stop. The K-9, who was moments ago just inches away from attacking, now looks confused, as if sensing the change in the air. The officer stutters, unsure of what to say. I didn't know," he mutters, his face pale. He looks down at the K-9, then back at the woman, as if trying to process the information. The woman's expression remains calm, but there's a quiet intensity in her eyes. She's not backing down. "I think it's time you learned who I am," she says, her voice steady but firm. The officer takes a step back, still confused. How could she be someone important? Why is she so calm in the face of a situation that would normally cause anyone to panic? The woman stands tall, then slowly reaches into her bag and pulls out her police badge. It's the same badge that any officer would carry, but there's something different about this one. As soon as the officer sees it, his entire demeanor changes. You're, he stammers, finally understanding. The woman is not just anyone. She's the one who's in charge of the department, the very person who oversees the officers he works with, including him. She owns the department, the same one that he works for. "I never thought I'd have to remind one of my own officers of who's in charge here," she says, her voice laced with authority. The officer is silent now, his face red with embarrassment. The K-9, sensing the shift in energy, sits down obediently by the woman's side. The woman's gaze never falters, and the officer stands there struggling to find words. The tension is palpable. He knows that what he's done is wrong, and now he's facing the consequences of his actions. It's clear that the power dynamics have shifted in an instant. "Apologize," the woman demands, her voice unwavering. The officer looks at her, his face full of shame. He hesitates for a second before he finally mutters an apology. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't mean to," he stammers. "Next time, think before acting," the woman replies, turning her back on him. She walks away, the officer left to stand there in his own regret. He watches her leave, knowing he just learned a lesson he'll never forget. As the woman walks away, the officer stands frozen in his spot, still processing the shock of the moment. The dog, now sitting peacefully, seems to have calmed down, sensing the shift in the air. The officer looks down at his shoes, trying to gather himself, but he can't shake the unease that's settled in his chest. The woman's steps are measured and firm as she approaches a group of officers, still watching from a distance. She doesn't look back, but they are all well aware of who she is now. The silence is almost deafening as the officers try to make sense of what just happened. "I'll deal with this later," the woman mutters under her breath, clearly upset by the whole situation. She pulls out her phone and sends a message. The words she types are short, but the message is clear. The woman is not only in control of the department, but also a strong voice for justice. The officer who had tried to intimidate her just moments before watches as the woman walks calmly away, holding her head high. Her demeanor exudes power, but also control. She isn't angry, she's disappointed, and that makes the officer feel even worse. As she reaches the entrance to the police headquarters, the door swings open. The woman enters with purpose, the building's atmosphere seemingly shifting in her presence. She is a force, someone to be respected, but someone who believes in fairness and accountability. Meanwhile, the officer stands at the edge of the sidewalk, his thoughts racing. He's still shaken, wondering how he could have missed it. How did he not realize who she was? How could he have allowed his actions to lead to this moment? His mistake is haunting him, and he knows it's not just about the woman he wronged. It's about the standards he should have upheld as a member of the police force. Minutes later, the officer walks through the front door of the building. The hallway feels longer now, more intimidating. He hesitates before entering the main office where the woman has gone. She's already speaking to a group of senior officers. His heart pounds as he steps inside the room. "I'll handle it," the woman says as she looks up from her desk. "You'll learn from this. But I don't tolerate disrespect in this department." Her voice is steady and filled with authority, but there's a hint of disappointment in her tone that the officer can't ignore. The officer swallows hard, then steps forward. "I'm sorry for what happened earlier. I didn't realize who you were," he admits, his voice filled with regret. The woman's eyes meet his, and for the first time he sees the depth of her strength and resolve. "This isn't about who I am," she replies. "It's about doing what's right." The officer nods, humbled and aware of the lesson he's just been taught. He understands now that it's not about rank or titles. It's about integrity, respect, and accountability, and he knows that moving forward, he will never forget this moment. The silence in the room is almost deafening after the officer's realization. As the woman walks past him, there's an undeniable change in the air. The officers watching are now fully aware of who she is, and they all feel the weight of the situation. The officer who had made the mistake stands frozen for a moment, his mind still racing from the shock. The woman, confident and unbothered, continues her walk through the police station. Her steps are deliberate, and with each step, her authority becomes even more clear. She doesn't need to raise her voice to command respect. Her presence alone is enough. As she moves through the building, the officer, still processing his actions, watches from a distance. His heart sinks as he realizes the enormity of his mistake. The embarrassment is overwhelming, but the lesson has only just begun. She enters her office. The door shuts behind her, and she takes a moment to gather herself. This moment is more than just about personal pride. It's about showing strength and the ability to hold others accountable. She's not just a figure of power in this department. She is the example. The officer eventually walks to her office, his shoulders slumped. He knocks softly and enters, his eyes avoiding hers. "I owe you an apology," he starts, his voice unsure. "I didn't recognize who you were, and I let my biases affect my behavior." She doesn't immediately speak. Instead, she looks at him, her eyes steady. "What you did wasn't just wrong, it was harmful, she finally says, her voice calm but firm. It's easy to forget who we are in this role, but respect for everyone, no matter their background or position, is what holds this department together. The officer nods, clearly realizing the gravity of the situation. He lowers his gaze. I understand now, he says. I promise this will never happen again. She takes a breath, her gaze softening just a bit. I appreciate your apology, but words alone aren't enough. It's your actions from here on out that will determine how much you've truly learned. He stands up straighter now, the weight of her words settling in. This is more than just an apology. It's a lesson, one that will stick with him for a long time. I'll make sure my actions reflect what you've taught me, he replies sincerely. As the officer leaves the room, he's not the same man who entered. He's humbled, but more importantly, he's motivated to do better, to live up to the standards that the woman had set. He now understands that true growth comes when we face our flaws and commit to changing them. The officer, now fully aware of his mistake, steps out of the office, his head low, but his heart determined. The weight of the words spoken by his superior still echoes in his mind. He knew he had to make things right, not just through words, but through actions. His reputation and the respect he had once commanded now hung in the balance. Outside the office, the other officers are waiting, the tension palpable. They've heard the conversation, felt the uncomfortable silence, and now they're waiting for him to speak up. As he walks toward them, the air is thick with anticipation. They all know something has shifted in him. But what exactly? Will he own his mistake, or will he retreat to old habits? One of the younger officers, a rookie still trying to find his place, looks at him with a mixture of concern and respect. "You all right, sir?" he asks, his voice unsure. The officer pauses for a moment, letting the weight of the question sink in. He's no longer the confident, self-assured figure they once saw. This moment has humbled him. He looks at the rookie and the others, then speaks with a quiet but firm resolve. "I'm fine, but I've got a lot of work to do. I need to make things right." With those words, the group falls silent. It's clear that this officer's journey is no longer just about his own pride. This is about something greater. The lesson he's learned has gone beyond just an apology. It's about redefining himself as a leader who values fairness and accountability. Meanwhile, in her office, the woman watches the scene unfold. She knows that this moment isn't just a victory for her, it's a victory for everyone who has ever been subjected to discrimination and mistreatment. But she doesn't allow herself to feel triumphant. Her role, her mission, was always about growth. It's about changing the system, not simply punishing the individual. As she looks out the window, she reflects on the countless moments where she had to stand tall, even when the odds were against her. She had been subjected to the same kind of mistreatment this officer had dished out, but she had risen above it. And now, she's in a position where she can make a change, not just for herself, but for the future of her department, her team, and the community at large. The officer approaches his supervisor, the one who had been watching him with a critical eye from the very start. His superior had been the one to lead him through the tough conversation earlier, and now they must face the reality of what comes next. The officer's posture is different now. He no longer stands with the same bravado that once defined him. This is a moment of reckoning. "We need to talk," he says to the supervisor, his voice steady but tinged with humility. "I've made a mistake, and I need to correct it. I've learned that it's not enough to just apologize. I have to show with my actions that I'm capable of leading with fairness and respect." The supervisor looks at him with a mixture of approval and caution. "That's the first step," he says, "but now you must prove it. Your actions in the coming weeks will tell whether or not you truly understand what it means to lead with integrity." The officer nods, understanding the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about making amends, it was about changing his approach, about earning back the trust he had lost. It would take time, and it would require a consistent effort on his part. But he was ready. Back in the main office, the woman stands up, a sense of calm and purpose radiating from her. She walks toward the door and takes a deep breath before stepping into the hallway. Her colleagues, those who had witnessed the entire event, stand up in quiet admiration. They can see the change in her too. The officer may have taken the first step, but she had set the stage for this moment of growth, not through force, but through wisdom and understanding. This wasn't just about one officer. This was about creating a culture where fairness and respect could flourish. It was about showing that accountability doesn't have to be punitive. It can be transformative. The woman had known this all along. Her work wasn't just about the job she held. It was about creating a legacy of integrity that would ripple through her department and beyond. The officer, after his meeting with his supervisor, steps into the hallway. His heart is still racing from the conversation, but there's a sense of clarity now. He knows what he has to do. There's no turning back. In the hallway, the woman stands with a few other colleagues, waiting for the officer to approach. She can see the change in his demeanor. He's no longer the man who had once believed his actions were beyond reproach. There's humility in his walk now, a recognition of his past mistakes. As he approaches her, she holds his gaze, unwavering. "You're on the right path," she says, her voice calm but firm. "But this isn't just about saying the right words. You need to show through your actions that you are committed to change." The officer nods, understanding the gravity of what she's saying. He's heard the words before: change, accountability, integrity. But now they feel different. They carry weight, a responsibility he hadn't fully understood before. "I'm ready," he says quietly. "I know what I need to do now." There's a slight pause before the woman responds, her eyes steady. "Prove it," she says simply. "Prove that you're more than just words. The trust you've lost is something you can't get back overnight, but you can start showing the difference today." The officer's face hardens with resolve, and he steps away from her, ready to begin his journey of change. The woman watches him walk away, and for the first time she feels a flicker of hope. She knows the road ahead won't be easy for either of them. But today, she's witnessed a shift in him, something that will affect not just his career but his character moving forward. Meanwhile, her colleagues continue to observe the situation, each one processing what has just unfolded. They've seen the officer's shift, but they've also seen her strength, her wisdom in guiding him. She didn't force him to change. She didn't demand anything from him. Instead, she led by example, demonstrating that leadership is not about authority. It's about fostering respect, accountability, and fairness. Later, when the officer returns to his team, there's a different energy in the room. His colleagues can sense it. The atmosphere is calmer, and the tension from before has dissipated. He doesn't need to say much. They know. He has shown through his actions that he is committed to doing better. The officer steps forward, his voice steady as he addresses the team. "I made a mistake," he begins, his eyes scanning the room, "and it's time to make it right. Not with apologies, but with actions. I want to be a leader who earns your trust, not demands it." There's a quiet nod of acknowledgement from his colleagues. The respect that had been lost is starting to rebuild. This wasn't a simple mistake. It was an opportunity to change, to grow, and they were watching him do it in real time. The woman, now standing at a distance, observes the scene unfolding before her. She's not looking for a pat on the back. She's not seeking approval. For her, this is the moment where real leadership begins to take root. This is what it looks like when someone takes responsibility for their actions and commits to doing better, not just for themselves, but for the entire team. Her role is clear. She is the bridge between a broken system and a better future. And as the officer continues to speak to his team, she knows that this shift in mindset isn't just a victory for him. It's a victory for everyone who believes in true justice, integrity, and fairness. The officer takes a deep breath as he walks back to his office, knowing that the work ahead of him won't be easy. But with every step, the weight of his past actions starts to feel lighter. He's committed to making things right, not just for himself, but for those he works alongside, for the community, and for the legacy he wants to leave behind. Back in the hallway, the woman's words still echo in his mind. Prove it. He knows the next steps he takes will define his future. He sits at his desk, the familiar surroundings now feeling different. He no longer sees them as just a workplace. He sees them as a space where change can begin. With a new mindset, he starts reviewing cases, familiarizing himself with the complaints and concerns from those he's been entrusted to protect. Each file, each piece of paper, no longer feels like a task to complete, but a responsibility to uphold. His colleagues, who had once seen him as an authority figure, begin to notice the change. They see him approach his work with a new sense of purpose. It's not just about following protocol anymore. It's about doing what's right, regardless of the consequences. They watch him interact with citizens, not with distance, but with a genuine effort to understand their perspectives. The shift is small, but it's noticeable. Meanwhile, the woman remains in the background, her work in the department continuing, but her mind still reflecting on her earlier interaction with him. She knows that change won't happen overnight, and it won't be easy, but the foundation has been laid. The officer has taken the first step toward being the kind of leader they need. And for the first time, she feels optimistic about the future of the department. Later that afternoon, the officer steps outside for a quick break. He sees the woman again, and this time, he doesn't hesitate. He approaches her with a sense of humility, his voice steady as he speaks. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation," he says, "and I just wanted to thank you. You didn't force me to change. You didn't demand anything from me. You gave me a chance to realize it for myself." The woman looks at him, nodding slowly. That's all anyone needs sometimes. Someone to see the potential in them even when they can't see it themselves. A silence falls between them for a moment, but it's not uncomfortable. It's the silence of understanding. "I won't let you down," the officer says quietly, determination in his eyes. She smiles softly, a sense of approval in her gaze. "I believe you," she replies. From that moment on, the officer begins making more than just small changes. He starts becoming the kind of leader who earns trust through his actions. His colleagues watch, and the community feels the impact. The shift in his mindset becomes a beacon of hope for others to follow. It's not just about punishing mistakes. It's about learning, growing, and creating a better future. The woman, watching from afar, knows that this is the moment when real change begins, not because of the officer's words, but because of the choices he's made and the accountability he's taken for his actions. As the tension in the room begins to settle, the officer stands there, still processing the consequences of his actions. He knows that something has to change within him, but he also knows that change isn't easy. He can't undo the past, but he can learn from it and use it to become better. This isn't just about him. It's about creating a better future, a future where injustice has no place, and where people are treated with the respect and fairness they deserve. The officer begins his journey of transformation, reaching out to people he never thought to listen to before. He makes calls, asks questions, and listens, really listens, to those who have been affected by the injustices he once ignored. He attends workshops on racial bias, learns about the struggles others face, and opens his eyes to a world he had been blind to. In the days that follow, he starts to change, slowly at first, but the change is undeniable. He no longer carries himself with the same arrogance and rigidity. His colleagues notice the difference, but it's the community members who feel it the most. They see him not as an officer of the law, but as a human being, someone who is willing to listen, learn, and grow. One day, the officer's mentor calls him into his office. The mentor, who had seen the officer at his lowest, now sees a man who is striving to do better. "I see the work you've been putting in," his mentor says with a nod of approval. "And I want you to know that I'm proud of you. But remember, change isn't just about what you do. It's about what you can inspire others to do." The officer looks down at the desk, reflecting on the words. The road ahead will be long, and there will be moments when he stumbles. But he's no longer walking that road alone. He has the support of those who truly understand, and most importantly, he has the trust of the people he now serves. The officer continues his journey, not only through training and education, but through every interaction with the people in his community. He takes the time to talk to them, to learn from their experiences, and to share what he's learned. With each conversation, with each lesson, he becomes more than just an officer. He becomes a role model, a symbol of redemption, and an example of what true growth looks like. As the weeks go by, the officer's transformation is visible to everyone around him. He no longer carries the weight of his past actions in the same way. Instead, he carries the lessons he's learned and the responsibility to do better for himself and for those around him. The department starts to change as well. Other officers, inspired by his growth, begin to follow his example. Slowly but surely, the culture within the department shifts. They begin to see their work not just as a job, but as a calling, one that requires compassion, understanding, and a willingness to stand up for what's right. The officer's journey is far from over, but as he looks at the path ahead, he knows that every step he takes brings him closer to the person he strives to be. His actions, though small at first, have the power to inspire others. And that's where true change begins. True growth and change come from understanding, empathy, and a willingness to admit past mistakes. Everyone has the potential to transform, and it is our responsibility to learn from our experiences and inspire others to do the same. When we take ownership of our actions, we open the door for a better, more compassionate world.